Okay, so Brendan, you can hear me?
I can hear you. Yes.
Loud and clear, yeah? Okay, so I'm going to start. Hello and welcome to the Cloudways Prepathon. This is Mohammed Muiz from Cloudways. I'm a WordPress community manager. I've been working here for the past 5 years. And today we're going to talk about web performance. Performance for your e-commerce store so that you can have a smooth BFCM sale. And to discuss that, we have a very special guest with us today. He's coming all the way from Australia, Mr. Brendan. Brendan, how are you, man?
No, good, mate. Yourself? You make it sound like I'm coming from a long way being in Australia.
Yeah, I mean, you are joining us from Australia. The time difference is huge, so I appreciate that.
My pleasure.
So please introduce yourself to the audience.
Sure. So I'm principal consultant at a company called WP Speedfix. So we specialize in WordPress speed optimization. Since we started this business in 2016. It's actually an offshoot of our SEO agency, but we started this particular business unit or brand in 2016. We've optimized over 4,000 WordPress websites. So we've got a lot of experience with site speed and WooCommerce in particular. We deal with a lot of WooCommerce clients who have issues with speed and performance, and not just, the typical, checking your homepage and Google PageSpeed insights, like quite complicated stuff. Like checkout speed, cart speed, WooCommerce sites that have huge load where they're on TV or doing TV advertising and getting a lot of load or a lot of visitors at once. So we know a lot about speed, and we've had our SEO agency since 2008, so we know a lot about e-commerce as well. So happy to jump on and talk site speed and performance and e-commerce and share.
That's excellent. So to start off this discussion, I'm going to be shooting a very simple question, and
sure.
a brief answer would be appreciated. So, how important is performance to have a successful BFCM sales campaign? If you can just give a two-liner answer for that.
Sure. So a lot of people, when you say performance, a lot of people think just pure site speed. But you also have to include kind of reliability, uptime and reliability in that as well, because it's all good and well to have a fast website or something that performs well. But if the website falls over or starts throwing errors when you have a handful of visitors on the site, that's a problem. So I'd say it's very important, and even more important than pure speed would be reliability and uptime, because if you send a mail out to 50,000 people and the site crashes, then you're not going to sell anything. So the sale is not going to work. So yeah, it's really important, but probably a little bit different to how most people would think about performance, in the mainstream idea of web performance.
Okay. So Brendan, I believe that you have prepared a presentation for us for the discussion on performance. You can start off with the introduction of your business, and obviously you have introduced yourself before, or you can just jump right on with the discussion and start with how speed impacts everything that your e-commerce store basically does.
Sure. Well, let's talk about that, because that's let's get into the meat and potatoes straight away. So let's talk about how site speed impacts SEO and marketing in general, because most people get this wrong. So there's actually three ways. People today are mostly interested in site speed because Google says it's good, but that's a bit of a one-dimensional approach. So there's actually three ways, and we just talked about uptime reliability, basically downtime, zero speed. So that's probably the most important. And when people kind of approach website speed, they go about it in the wrong way. First off, they'll look at the Coreware Vitals stuff and what Google says, and then they'll work backwards. And a lot of the time, they just completely ignore uptime reliability. So these are the three ways that site speed impacts SEO and marketing. So reliability, the size of each page. So no matter how fast your hosting is, if you have a page that has massive images on it or huge videos, and it's 5 or 10 megabytes to download, it's going to be slow regardless of the best hosting and the best server and the best technology in the world. And then Crux data or Coreware Vitals data and the real user experience, not necessarily what shows up in a GT metrics test or a Google PageSpeed Insights test, but how users actually really experience the site. So should we talk about, we'll dig into these three and talk about how to optimize for each of these? Yeah,
Absolutely, but I want to point out something very interesting over here, and it's good that you have started off with SEO because for an e-commerce store heading into BFCM, SEO is crucial, yeah, because if your store is not ranking on specific keywords that you're targeting, uh, where are you going to get your organic traffic from? So could you please speak on how important is SEO for an e-commerce store, and is it that important during the holiday season as well?
Yeah, I mean, if you're thinking about SEO, it's like a week or two to Black Friday, so it's probably a bit late to be talking about SEO right now. But yeah, I'd say it's really important, and probably in our SEO agency work, one of the most overlooked elements of SEO is how you rank for your brand, for brand terms, product terms. Anything that's closely related to the business. So how, if you're actually ranking for your brand terms, and what the search results look like for brand terms as well, because quite often you'll find clients, particularly bigger stores, bigger sites are always going to have negative reviews somewhere. So if someone Googles your brand, do you actually appear, and are there negative reviews showing in the search results? So I'd say it's very critical, but again, most people gloss over the kind of basic stuff, ranking for product names, so actual products you sell, particularly if you're direct to consumer. People don't really think about that, and then they go after the kind of bigger head terms, the things that they're fun and exciting. So I'd say particularly Black Friday stuff and big and holiday sales in general, people are going to be searching for your brand or your business or your products. So making sure you rank for those, making sure the search results look good, looking at, if Google is showing Google shopping ads in those search result pages, it's probably a good idea to make sure that your own shopping ads are ranking there, and you don't have a bunch of competitor products showing the search results. So I'd say very important, but probably different to how most people would immediately think about SEO. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting that you have mentioned uptime and reliability, because just like performance, we have another theme for Friday in the prepathon where we talk about reliability, and it's great that how performance links to these things, and it shows how important performance is for an e-commerce store. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said before, it's not just the homepage and how fast that loads. Most people don't go through their own checkout a lot, and things like how someone clicks the add to cart button and it takes 30 seconds for something to add to the cart, especially a WooCommerce site that's under heavy load, that's a real problem. So you have like the typical how fast are the pages loading performance, but then you also have how fast is the checkout going, the add to cart functions, people in the my account section, if we're talking about WooCommerce, all that stuff will get overlooked. It's kind of hard to test quickly as well. If you don't have technical people in your team or a developer working with you, it's really hard to test the add to cart other than going to the website and adding to cart and see what happens. Like, it's hard to test that under load when you might have, you do a mail out and there might be 100 or 500 or 1,000 people on the site at once. So, so that those elements as well are really important, not just the typical kind of site speed stuff that most people are familiar with.
Okay, awesome. So uptime and reliability.
Yeah, so we kind of went through all these points. Probably the one there, the last one, when people talk about seeing a gain, they do site speed stuff, they do some optimization, whatever it is. A lot of the time, people will see the speed improve, but what they've actually done and they're not aware of, they've improved the reliability of the site. So a lot of the time we see people who do speed stuff and for example, we'll move. So we use Cloudways is the host we typically recommend. So we'll move someone from a cheapy shared host that, a $2 a month host onto a Cloudways server. And certainly it's going a lot faster, but most of the gains, if they see an SEO jump or they see some gains there, a lot of the time that's attributed to speed, whereas it's actually a reliability thing that they probably weren't aware before that the site was going offline or throwing up errors or doing weird things for customers. And we see that all the time. I've got a couple of, I think on the next slide here. So we have a couple of action items in terms of like doing something about this, like some tangible things people can do if they're watching and they're like, okay, that makes sense. What do we do there? So probably the easiest one, and it's also free, they have a free plan, is use Uptime robot monitoring. So the free plan will check the website on 5-minute intervals. The paid plan is also very cheap and it checks the website on 1-minute intervals. So we typically say, make sure you got it set up for the homepage and probably like the top 5 or 10 pages of products or categories. And maybe also, the My Account page or something like that where people are logging into. Because it's checking on 1-minute intervals, if there's some reliability issues where the site's going offline and online, or it's throwing up errors like 502 or 504 errors, which are usually related to too much load or the server just can't handle what's happening, then it'll usually show up in Uptime monitoring, and then you can do something about it. So we recommend Uptime monitoring. We talked about hosting, so using Cloudways, using Cloudflare. So even if you just use it for DNS hosting, but Cloudflare for CDN and DNS, and particularly Cloudflare's newer APO service, and especially if you're going to throw a lot of traffic at a website, and it's a WordPress website, their APO service, which is $5 a month, is dirt cheap. And in a lot of cases, you'll be able to scale the traffic to your website 2 to 10x just with that cheap service. And that used to only be available on their $200 a month plan and above. Now it's $5 a month, so that's a no-brainer. And then also using backups. So things go wrong all the time. So usually we recommend using hosting backup and a second backup. So we use BlogVault. BlogVault also have a feature where they can do real-time backups. So particularly like a WooCommerce site's getting orders all the time, and it will back up as changes are happening. So a new order comes in and BlogVault will back that up. It'll just continually back up on a real-time basis. So usually those are kind of like the big action points in terms of boosting reliability. So uptime monitoring, so you're aware if something's going wrong. Cloudflare and Cloudflare's APO service, that would be an easy one to do before Black Friday. And then making sure you've got some backups. If something does go wrong, the site gets hacked, the site crashes, then if you're doing real-time backups, then you've got really good rollbacks. So you can roll back to, you won't lose any orders if you have real-time backup. So those are like the broad recommendations we typically have for clients. Did that all make sense?
Yeah, I mean, that's extremely insightful. And coming from someone like you, who has so much experience working with e-commerce stores and working on performance and speed, giving such detailed insights on how to use those tools, because I have seen in the community that a lot of people do use these tools, but they don't have an idea on how to use them in a better way. And I think the things that you have recommended and the things that you have mentioned, I'm sure people are going to see better results with these tools now.
Yeah, and they're all pretty easy to do. You could get if you're fairly technical, you'll be able to DIY them. But if you're not, you don't need an expensive high-level developer to do them. Like a mid-level WordPress developer can sort them out for you. So pretty straightforward. You can DIY, or it's going to be cheap to get someone to do it for you. Let's see what we got next. So do you want to talk about page weights and page sizes? Should we talk through this?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. So, like I said before, it doesn't matter how.
This is very important because when you have an e-commerce store, you have a lot of product pages, you have a lot of images as well. And one of the common mistakes that store owners make is to have unoptimized heavy images on their store, because obviously they wouldn't compromise on the quality of the images, because the better the image, the better the image quality, the better the chances of conversion. But obviously there must be a solution where they can use those high quality images and still maintain the performance benchmarks.
Yeah, so particularly again, because e-commerce sites have a lot of images, so you might have a product page that has 5 or 10 product images. So, and a lot of the time those images are going to be above the fold. So they're going to be high up on the page, which means they're probably going to load when the page loads. So it's really important that you're aware of how big your pages are. because no matter how fast the hosting is, how fast everything else is, if the visitor has to download 10 megabytes of images and stuff, then that's going to be a slow experience, especially if they're on a mobile device, because the mobile device has less CPU power and it's probably on a slower internet connection, or it might be out of range, or might be further away from Wi-Fi, or they might only have 2 bars of signal or something like that. So when people look at site speed stuff, usually they look at the home page and they might look at one other page or 2 other pages that are the highest ranking pages. But it's important to check site-wide. So what we've seen, Coreware Vital stuff aside, and we saw this years ago, when a site has a lot of pages that are generally over 5 megabytes in size, then it will have ranking problems. Google doesn't like to crawl it, doesn't index pages very well, or just pages that should rank on the first page are just stuck at like position 20 or 30. They just won't rank. And as soon as you fix that issue where you've got a lot of big pages, then suddenly rankings start to go up, pages get indexed properly. Some of those issues that are kind of technical SEO issues go away. So it's quite easy to do a site-wide test. Screaming Frog SEO Spider, which is an SEO tool, which is a really silly name, but it has a free version, and you can use that to test or check site speed site-wide and page sizes site-wide. So if someone's listening to this, that's a tool I recommend. There's also another tool that I'm pretty sure it checks page sizes, but it's called batchspeed.com, and that'll do a site-wide test as well. But I'm not sure if it checks the actual page sizes, but that would be the other one to look at. So we're really aiming for pages really should be under, if you want to be as fast as possible, they need to be under 1.5 megabytes. But I'd say 3 megabytes is kind of the cutover or cutoff. You want to be under 3 megabytes. Anything over 3 megabytes is going to be kind of a crappy experience for visitors, or some visitors anyway, who are on slower internet. So should we talk about fixing it? So in terms of doing something about this, if you're on WooCommerce or WordPress, we use the plugin EWWW for image compression. Yeah. And if you're on Cloudways, you'll be able to use this plugin without paying for any of the cloud services, because it can optimize just using the local server CPU. So it'll do it really fast. So even if you had 50,000 images, it'd probably take half an hour to an hour, because it can be done on the server itself. So I'd recommend that plugin. Even out of all the plugins, like we've used them all, Short Pixel, Imagify, Smush, all the plugins. This one, even if you go for the paid option, is still dirt cheap. It's the cheapest out of all of them. So that's the one we recommend. You also need to use lazy loading. So if you're not familiar with lazy loading, it means that only the images that are viewable on the screen load, and everything else below the fold doesn't load until the user scrolls down. So those are usually the 2 issues we see: images that aren't compressed, or the site just doesn't have lazy loading. So there's 2 free options there. WP Rocket has a free lazy load plugin, and then EWWW will do the image compression for free if you're on Cloudways.
Yeah, I mean, I have heard of the EWW plugin. I'm sure a lot of the people listening to this have also heard of it. And obviously, WP Rocket is one of the best in the business at the moment. So yeah, I mean, but the thing is, this is also contrary to the fact that a lot of plugins, the more plugins you have on your website, the bloatier it gets and the slower it gets. So is there a solution in between where we can use these plugins and still make our site lighter and optimize for performance? Because I have heard a lot of people in the community, they recommend a lot of plugins, but then those same people say that, okay, so you shouldn't have a lot of plugins on your site, on your store, because it's gonna make it bloated.
Yeah, I mean, one of the problems with WooCommerce is that everything needs a plugin, but you just need to be mindful. Like I think these speed plugins are fine. You don't want to go crazy and have 200 plugins on a site, but some of these things are worth having. There's kind of like people hate adding more plugins in a sense. Like less plugins certainly is faster, but the plugin is just a way to add code to the website. So some of these are like the lazy loading and the image compression are fairly light. If a plugin's, and these are two well-written plugins, if a plugin is poorly written, then that's going to be a problem. It's going to be slow. It might do something every time a page loads. There's a couple of resources if you are worried about plugins. There's two things I'd probably recommend. One, we have a blog post that if you just Google optimize WordPress without plugins, there's a whole bunch of steps there about how to squeeze more speed out of WordPress without using plugins. And there's a lot of simple things in there, like using a content delivery network, using paid Cloudflare plan. The $20 a month Cloudflare plan does image compression. So in theory, you wouldn't necessarily need to use an image plugin if you had that, but it's always better to compress images on WordPress itself. It'll just get you a better result. So do that. So Google that, just WordPress speed optimization without plugins. And then the other one is probably use the plugin Query Monitor. So we're talking about less plugins. We're talking about installing another one. So the plugin Query Monitor, if you install that, it'll show you at the top in the admin bar in WordPress. It'll give you a kind of timer. It'll tell you how long it took for the database lookups and how long it took to generate that page. So it'll kind of give you an idea of how slow or how fast the page is loading. And it'll also tell you if there's errors. So if you're in the back end and the back end of your site's really slow, that's a good way to start diagnosing issues. And it will tell you if a plugin, particularly if the back end's slow, it usually means there's an error or a plugin is doing something silly. And that's a good way to start diagnosing it. So if a plugin has an error, it'll tell you which plugin is doing it, and then you can, update it or remove it or talk to their support or whatever and kind of troubleshoot the issue. But those would be my two recommendations if you do have concerns about plugins, or you just have like a really slow back end, or even on the front end, if the cart and checkout are going slow, then it usually means there's something going on with the site performance, or there's a plugin playing up or something along those lines.
Yeah, makes sense. Awesome.
So that's page weights. What else do we have here? Let's see what we got. All right, let's talk about Coreware Vitals. So maybe we should talk about this report. So Coreware Vitals, for anyone who's not aware, is the real world data, speed data from your website. Google collects that using Google Chrome and collates it. So it's actually, no matter what it says in a speed test tool, if your Coreware Vitals data looks bad, then users are having a bad experience on the site. So at a bare minimum, you see, I think this next slide has the link. So this link here, I think you probably need to put the link out with this webinar. But this link here is a bit of a funny one, g.co/Chrome UX dash. This is a Google Data Studio report, and I'll pull up the Cloudways one here. This is one I prepared earlier. So if you go to that link and put in your website, it creates this report automatically. So this report is called the Crux dashboard. So it gives you the data Google has on your site speed. So this report will update automatically. So it'll update on the second Tuesday of each month. So it's just updated this week with October's data. So this is the Coreware Vitals data for the Cloudways website. So you can see here it has LCP time, has the first input delay, and then it has CLS or layout shift. So we want these to, in order for Google to be happy and mark the website as good or fast, these numbers need to be green at over 75%. So there's a little bit of room to improve here. These numbers, ideally in a perfect world, we want that at 75% or above. Same with the layout shift. So we're okay on mobile, but we're failing on desktop here a little bit. And then there's other pages in the report. So I'd also look at time to first byte. That's also a good one. So if you have a WooCommerce site and this is looking poor, then Cloudflare's APO service should help improve it. So green is where the time to first byte has been under half a second. So you can see here, something happened in September on the Cloudways website. We went from 25 to 30% to 43% in the green here. So there must have been a change made at server level or something to improve that. But if you have a WooCommerce site, if you're using Cloudflare APO, you should actually be able to get the green up here to 60 or 70% on most websites. So I would say that there's quite a few users having a pretty ordinary experience here looking at these numbers. The other one I'd also look at, so that's time to first byte. again, if you Google how to fix time to first byte or reduce time to first byte, we have a blog article that's on the first page of Google somewhere that talks about things to do to improve that. And then first contentful paint. So these two are not Coreware Vitals. So time to first byte is not a Coreware Vital. It is a Web Vitals metric, but it is really important. So let's just talk about that for a sec. So ideally, we want this as high as possible. But what this means is 42.9, 43% of users had a time to first byte of under half a second. So that's okay. But these guys here, and these guys here in particular, they had a time to first byte at over 1.5 seconds. So what that means is 8% of the users were staring at a blank screen for over 1.5 seconds, waiting for something to load. So that's what that means there. That's basically the lag before the browser starts doing something.
Okay.
And related to that is FCP time, or first contentful paint. So this is, from a user perspective, this is the time at which they see something appear on the page. So usually that's the logo, because the logo is usually at the top of the page. So Google wants to see this number under 1.8 seconds. So they say 1.8 seconds or below is good. You're doing okay here, but certainly could be a bit better as well. So again, something happened here in September, October, because your number went up. But so this is 58% of users had something when they went to the website, something appeared in under 1.8 seconds. So this is a really useful report for kind of, looking at your management reports or marketing reports every month and seeing how the performance is doing. And it will give you a good idea of where to optimize or what's going wrong or where it's slow. The other place to look at this data would be Google Search Console. Google Search Console will give you the individual page level problems. It'll tell you which pages are slower or have problems. But this one, most people don't know about this report. And so, if you have an e-commerce site, this is a really easy way to kind of measure site speed at that high level. So did that all make sense? It's fairly technical.
This is extremely insightful, and I hope that the people who are watching this, listening to this, they are taking notes. This is something that they are probably gonna hear in a paid speed performance course. And Brendan over here is telling you all this for free. This is amazing stuff that Brendan is throwing out here in this session. So I hope that the guys and the people who are listening to this are taking notes. If you're not, you can obviously rewatch this as well. This is going to be on the website for forever. You can listen to this again and again and get as much useful information as you can from Brendan and this session.
Yeah.
So Brendan, that was amazing. That was extremely insightful. Yeah.
Cool. That's good. Just a couple of points on this Coreware Vital stuff. So this report only updates every month. So again, like I said, second Tuesday of each month. If you're doing stuff in Google Search Console, there's a 28-day cycle time. So Coreware Vitals data works on a 28-day average. So if you fix speed, it'll take 28 days for you to actually see whether it's fixed it, according to Google anyway. So that's important to keep in mind. So those numbers won't change straight away. So I think that's everything there. But there's a couple more slides here with sites jargon. But I don't know if you want to go through that, or if we have time. I don't know how we're doing for time, but
you can go through those. You can just skim through those if you want to touch those points as well. And if you think those are important for people to know.
Yeah, I think we talked about these, and we can give people access to these slides anyway, and they can, because some of it, it's so technical that if you want to dig into something, then there's plenty of Googling you can do. So we kind of talked about these. So let me go back. We talked about time to first byte. We talked about page sizes. We talked about FCP time. LCP time is when the biggest piece of content or image on the page loads. So that's one of the Coreware Vitals. We didn't talk about this. We didn't talk about lab and synthetic data versus field data. So let's talk about that for a sec.
Sure.
So when you're looking at site speed, when you run a speed test in GTmetrix, Google PageSpeed Insights, web page test, wherever it is, that's called a lab test or synthetic testing. So it's not real world data. So that's it's a lab. It's not a real user experience. That's what's called lab testing, synthetic testing. And then there's field data or real user data. So that's the Coreware Vitals data. So that's the data that's the speed that users are experiencing in the real world. So that's Coreware Vital stuff. So it's important to understand the difference, because you can get a very fast Google PageSpeed Insights score, but not a very good field data Coreware Vitals score. And the reason for that might be because you have users all around the world, and Google PageSpeed Insights web test, the web-based test, is testing from the US. So, someone in Australia, you might have a lot of visitors from Australia and they're getting a crappy experience because you don't have a content delivery network. So it's important to understand that. Let's see what else we have here. Layout shift, that's probably important to understand. So layout shift, CLS, is one of the Coreware Vitals metrics as well. So that needs to be on the 0.1. And if you're not technical, basically layout shift is when the page loads and you go to click on something and then the page moves under the mouse and you're in a different spot. So that's not a score or it's not a speed, it's a score. It's a calculated score. So that needs to be on the 0.1. So if you have things like ads, like if you have like Mediavine or AdThrive ads or something like that, or AdSense ads, then you might have high CLS, so that could be a problem. If you do have an ad network, talk to the ad network. A lot of them have features that you can turn on that can fix that. And sometimes it's speed related, like content delivery network will speed things up, or it just could be, the site is old and you've got some bad CSS or old CSS. But there's lots of different reasons why you have CLS. But that's an important one to be aware of. I think that's what we had on the jargon. Render blocking, you'll see this stuff. If you're looking at any kind of site speed stuff, you'll see stuff around render blocking. So that relates to CSS and JavaScript. Again, if you just Google WP Speedfix, how to optimize JavaScript, you'll get a very detailed article on how to fix this sort of stuff here. So, I mean, we could talk for hours on this stuff, but
absolutely. Yeah. So Brendan, that was an amazing presentation on web speed, performance, and optimization, and some very useful topics that you touched on. Now there are some things that I wanted to discuss with you. And being a community guy, I hear about these things a lot in the community, and the people who are listening to this will also be interested in hearing your perspective. So what are some of the things that store owners usually neglect when they are basically optimizing their site for speed? Like, what are the rookie mistakes that they make? What are the things that they ignore and that they shouldn't ignore and are very important in speed optimization? So what are some of the things that you have experienced, people, making mistakes? Yeah.
Probably the biggest one is the page sizes. That's probably the most common mistake and the one that's ignored the most, and it's also the easiest to make. So with an e-commerce site, like a big e-commerce site with hundreds or thousands of products, you'll have a team uploading those products most of the time. So a lot of the time they are not technical and they'll just upload any image they find at all. So that's probably the biggest one and the easiest way. So we do a lot of speed work and people ask, will the speed results stick? And the biggest way to make sure they stick is to include a speed test in the product or page publishing process. So if you add a new product, just test the speed of that page once you've added it or published it or whatever, and make sure it's not too big. Make sure there isn't a 5 megabyte image uploaded. So that's probably the biggest single mistake. Certainly uptime can be a problem for WooCommerce sites because there's such a requirement for load there. So even a small amount of users on a WooCommerce site can use a lot of CPU power. So having Uptime Robot will give you more insights into the site reliability. I'd say that's important as well, because a lot of people, we talk to a lot of people and they're like, my site loads fast, it loads perfectly fine for me. And then you start looking at the website and it's going on and offline all the time just because of load. So, they have a few people on the website at once checking out and the website starts crashing and things like that. So those would probably be the two big ones, page sizes and monitoring the uptime. So.
All right, so I'm going to be interrupting this this session because we have another guest with us. he's basically not a guest. He's the co-host. He's my colleague, my very good friend, Alexander Savkovic, all the way from Serbia. Alex, how are you, man?
Yeah, good. How are you guys?
I'm great. I'm great. And so basically, I was having this discussion with Brendan on speed and performance and how it impacts the BFCM season that is coming. That is like just a few days later. So, Alex, what are some of the important points that you need to touch on being in the industry for so long? You must have a lot of things that you need to discuss that you should be discussing with Brandon. So anything that you have in mind that you want to put it out there for our audience?
Yeah, well, in my personal opinion, uh, I think people became like obsessed with this, with the page speed and that kind of stuff. It really became obsession. It's not anymore like I want my website to perform well, but it's like competition. Like who will have a faster website?
Yeah, who
And
scores the most?
at the end of the day, probably 360 days per year, it's not that important. But for those 5 days when there is like Black Friday and that kind of uh, panic and hectic days for your shop, only for those 5 days actually it should be overly optimized and overly engineered to perform well, because for those 5 days you will really need that kind of shop. But for the rest of the year, probably it's very often over engineered. But in my opinion, that uh, user experience is way more important than the speed itself, and the speed is the part of that, of course, user experience. Uh, Even though it is the part of user experience, 1 second more or less doesn't ruin my user experience on some website. But optimizing it for these events like huge sales and huge number of visitors you never had during the year, yeah, for that definitely is like extremely important to have well optimized website.
Yeah,
I
I
don't.
mean, and also I'm sorry, Alex, I forgot to give you an introduction. We just joined and we started talk. So could you please introduce yourself to the audience first?
Yeah, I'm Alexander Savkovic. Alex, I'm in WordPress world like for nearly a decade, and at the moment I'm community manager at Cloudways together with Moise. Prior to Cloudways, I was working mostly for hosting companies. Somehow, my luck turned that way when I started to work in WordPress, because the first company I worked for was acquired by the hosting company, and then from them until today, I'm
Uh-huh.
just in hosting companies. Also, I'm WordPress developer, and this kind of stuff like performance optimizations, etc., is something I should know inside out. However, however, Google is changing things so fast. Like, there's one thing that bothers me about Google and Google page speed is that they actually ask from you to optimize the script, which is their script, like Google Analytics, like Google Ads, like AdSense, like something like that, like Google Fonts. Like, people stop measuring something you told me to add to my website, and then you're suggesting me to remove your script, which I have to use on a specific website because you told me to use it. So there are things like when you're testing, you're just not sure what you should do because it's theirs.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of things that people come across and they find it confusing, and that is exactly why we're having this session. So, Alex, you pointed out user experience and how important it is for an e-commerce store to have a better user experience, especially during the holiday season, and how performance is a part of that, a very huge part for that matter. So, Brendan, how do you see a user experience for an e-commerce store? Because at Cloudways, even being a hosting provider, we we promise our users and our customers a magical experience and how to make your hosting experience magical. So, how important is user experience for an e-commerce store, and how can they improve it apart from optimizing the site for speed? And as Alex mentioned, it has become an obsession. Like I've seen in the community that people are sharing their performance scores and they're competing against one another, that mine is faster and
Yeah.
stuff like that. So how important is user experience, and how apart from performance can they improve it? If you can just touch base on that
Sure.
briefly.
And I totally agree. I don't even go on the Facebook groups anymore because people are just crazy about site speed. And while site speed is important, it's, no one ever got rich by having 100 score and page speed in sites. There are other things that are important. We see so many websites that they have 100 score and page speed insights, but the SEO is horrible. So there's definitely other things that need attention. So I would not say that speed is the most important. It's one of maybe 20 things that are very important. Um,
Yeah.
Broadly from user experience stuff, there's a lot of stuff in the conversion rate optimization space that gets totally ignored. Like CRO, like SEO is very popular. AdWords, Facebook ads, they get a lot of attention because people are spending money there, so that people want to optimize those. But,
Yeah.
an element doesn't get a lot of attention. And that isn't just getting more people to convert; it's all about a better user experience. The pages make more sense. The flow to the checkouts, it's well optimized and things like that. So
Mhm.
I don't necessarily have specific advice, but broadly it would be don't ignore CRO, and it doesn't necessarily have to be even split testing or getting into that level of detail. Just running some simple heat map tools like Hotjar or Crazy Egg or Lucky Orange, and watching what people do. So I think all three of those tools, Hotjar and Lucky Orange, definitely will record. You can see recordings of videos of visitors on the website, so you'll see the mouse movements and them clicking around. So even just looking at some of those will probably give you some insights into where the user experience could be improved or where it's crappy. Actually, I think there's also a free tool from Microsoft. There is, called Clarity, so completely free, and that'll give you that as well. So I would say, use data to look at the user experience and actually
Yeah.
have a look. Spend some time. Like we have clients who just install Clarity and just sit down for an hour and watch user videos and see what they're doing, and you'll find people going in circles, doing weird things, clicking on things that don't work or buttons broken and things like that. So I'd say that'd be like the 101 version of looking at user experience and improving that.
Yeah. Good.
You
That. Yeah. Yeah, Alex.
you're probably surprised where they're actually clicking and what they're actually doing sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because you're like 100% sure, yes, I did my job well, and then you see someone is moving mouse and staying in one part of the page for too long, and you don't know what they're actually looking for on that specific piece of your page, but they're definitely confused with something.
Yeah. Or do
So
you see
so
things
so
that are
Alex.
broken as well, like things you didn't know that were broken, and they're clicking on it. They're rage clicking. You'll see a lot of clicks. And they're like, oh, that's why they're getting upset. So, yeah.
So Alex, we have discussed how performance affects SEO. We have discussed how performance affects actually user experience. What else does it impact? What for from an e-commerce store owner's point of view? What else does web performance or speed have an impact on?
Well, as I said, I believe that the most important thing why it's so important to have optimized shop is only the moment when it needs to load nicely. It doesn't have to be like under 1 second. Everything under 2 seconds or 2.23 seconds is fine. But if it's loading over 2 seconds in the moment when you have more visits or many visits at the same time, many people, then you have a problem. Because if it's loading on testing over 2 seconds, and you're on some maybe lower plan, you will have a problem with loading with more concurrent users. So that, yes, I agree that for these kind of events, it should be over optimized and over engineered, of course. But from the human perspective, like what visitors are looking on your website is, firstly, they were looking for something on Google when they ended up on your website. So they know what they want, they know what they're looking for. It's on you just to sell them as soon as possible. So that kind of user flow on the website is like they came to give you money. So take their money, don't send them like to read some blog post or to visit some page, and then from that page to visit some category, and then from that category to end up on a product which is variable product with like 57 variations, and then I will just drop it. I will like, okay, I don't want to buy it now.
Yeah.
I don't have time for this. So optimizing that journey, user journey on your website is quite important. Like inline checkout, not to have like cart and then it redirects you to another page, and then you have a huge checkout form in WordPress with gazillion fields, but splitting that checkout in smaller steps, but inlining it in one screen to have that kind of experience. That is something that is good optimization for WooCommerce Shop, especially because it doesn't have to open another page. It will be happening in one page. So that kind of stuff definitely would improve user experience on the website.
Okay. Thank you. On that note, I would like to thank Brendan for taking his precious time out from his very busy schedule to be on this session and give such an amazing presentation and an amazing talk. Because it was so insightful. I'm sure people who are listening to this would have taken a lot from what you just said, from what you have presented and what you have said, and apply directly on their stores and get instant results. I mean, this was amazing. Thank you, Brendan. Thank you, Alex, for popping in as well. And I know the time difference in Serbia. I'm not sure if you had your morning coffee yet, but thank you. Thank you, Alex, for joining and providing your insight. So, ladies and gentlemen, this was it from the BFCM Prepathon performance and optimization session. If you have any questions, queries, do engage in the comment section, and we will make sure to reply to those as well. Thank you, Brendan. Thank you, Alex. See you guys in another session tomorrow, because this BFCM Prepathon is a week-long event. We will have a number of sessions throughout the week, so stay tuned. Do watch those sessions as well, because everything in those sessions is prepared to gear you up for the BFCM season that is upon us. Thank you, everyone, and goodbye.
Bye.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.